Okay, we are here today on March 3rd, 2013, and we are interviewing Harry Edwards, and he is with the 1st Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry during the Korean War. We're in the boardroom, and we're going to start off the interview with asking Harry, could he give us his full name and maybe where he was born?
Harry Arthur Edwards, born Hamilton, Ontario, March the 2nd, 1928. So that makes me 85 as of yesterday.
Happy birthday! This is great. So now, when did you join the military, and who did you join, Harry?
Well, I joined during the Second World War in the militia originally as a drummer in an artillery, a militia artillery unit, a light AA battery really, and of course when you go in the military, you have to learn the Army skills first, and these other things like drumming in the band, second sort of thing. So we were on 25 pounders at Petawawa when I was 15 during the summer concentration down there. And when I become 17, I went to Toronto, lied about my age, got into the military. The war in Europe was winding down at this time. However, things were still going in the Pacific. So I went into Pacific training at Orillia, Ontario, a basic training camp there. And I was injured by a knee injury on the firing range and ended up in Camp Borden where the Americans let off the A-bomb, and that was the end of, or the beginning of the end of the war in the Pacific. A lot of us young chaps then went to North Bay, Ontario, where we received training for guarding German prisoners of war, which we had in Canada by the thousands. And I ended up in a place called Monteith in northern Ontario. It's up around the Timmins area. And we had thousands of them there, most of them from the Africa Corps, and merchant seamen were the prisoners. And we guarded them there, and then when all hostilities ended, we escorted them from the prison camps on train loads down to Halifax, where they were placed them on ships, and there was a group there, military police and so on, that took them back to Europe, sort of thing. Shortly after that, I ended up in Chorley Park in Toronto, guarding prisoners there, as a number of the prisoners of war were, well, they had the opportunity to work, and a number of them in Toronto worked at the Cookstown, I think it is, Cookstown brick yards. And like any industry, some of them become injured and they ended up in the hospital. And there was a group of us guards there that guarded and went in with the nurses while they attended to injured prisoners. For example, one of the prisoners there had his leg removed because a dragline bucket, the cable broke, and he was on the ground working with the chap who was operating the machinery, and the bucket, when it broke loose, he couldn't get out of the way in time, and it crushed his leg so bad that, of course, he was brought to Chorley Park. Gangrene set in, and eventually he had to have the leg removed. Just a kind of a side note to that same chap, as you can well imagine, in guard duty, you sit in the room with these people because you have to be there when the nurses come in around these people, and you have many hours of talking, sort of thing, and many of the prisoners could speak quite good English. And this chap asked me if I would mind looking in the phone book in Toronto for this name, as it was his aunt who lived in Toronto, sort of thing. So here was a guy here who was a merchant seaman, and he had been captured and put into a prison camp, worked at the brickyard, and had relatives in Toronto, for heaven's sake. After that, I took my release from the military, and I worked on the Great Lakes as a sailor, and then I went out to the East Coast and managed to get a ship down to South America. When I come back, the docks were crawling with ex-sailors and everyone else. You couldn't buy a job, so I was sitting in Windsor's train station when a young chap walked by, smartly turned out, from the Royal Canadian Regiment. I went over and spoke to him, and he was from Montreal, and I said, well, I was Army, and I think I would like to go back in again. I said, where do I go to enroll? And he said, at Water Street. He said, just go to St. Catharines here, follow it up the street here for about 3 blocks, which I did. And this was in December of 48, and, 47 rather. And I can remember I'd just come from the tropics, and I had on very light clothing, and I was on the back of this here truck. I had to go to St. Jean military base in the back of a truck with a golfer's jacket on and a sports shirt, sandals, and very light trousers. Needless to say, by the time we had gone to 20 some odd miles, I was quite frozen to death, sort of thing. Almost, that is. Anyway, managed to get through all the with the enrollment side of things, and was told, and because I lied about my enrollment, you had to have the minimum was grade 10, which I did not have. So I told them that I had grade 10 and that I had never had any military service before, and went through all the tests and passed them with flying colors. And of course, because I had done many of them before. So anyway, I was shipped off to Camp Borden, where we were to do, I think it was 8 weeks of training there. Once you had, I think it was something in the vicinity of 40 men arriving there from the various depots across Canada. And anyway, I was about 2 weeks into training when I was called into the training major's office in the School of Infantry, and I was told that I had been found out, that I had previous service, etc., and that because of my lying, I was being charged for giving false attestation, sort of thing. Anyway, I did my time, extra duties and drills in the evening for, I think it was 14 days, and I just carried on with my training, at which time, when the training ended, we were asked where we wanted to go, PPCLI, RCR, or Royal 22nd. I picked PPCLI, as did quite a number of my comrades, and because quite a few of them were already from the West. And anyway, I didn't want to go RCR because I was from Ontario, so, and I couldn't speak French, so I didn't want to go to the Royal 22nd. So I thought, well, I'll give PPCLI a shot. And I stayed there for 18 years until I was medically released from the military, sort of thing. At the time of my release from the military, I was an instructor at the School of Infantry as a sergeant, and I was quite devastated being told I had to leave the service, because my intention was to stay until I had about 30 or 35 years in. However, I wasn't able to do that because the Minister for Defense at that time said anyone with a category of 3 or lower automatically had to leave the service. Well, prior to him making that statement, about 6 months before that, I'd had a ruptured disc in my lower back from a parachute accident I had with the Patricias. And I was a category 5 at that time. You had to wait 6 months where you could go for a reboard, and if you could pass the reboard, then you were brought from a 5 to a 4, and then after a year you had another reboard where you could go from a 4 to a 3 if you could pass all the tests. But I never got that opportunity. I was just told, like everyone else, that I had to leave the service. It was about Christmas time when this happened to me. I had just finished, or almost finished, my tour of duty in the School of Infantry. I was really looking forward to going back to my unit in Calgary when this was dropped on me, sort of thing. So because it was near Christmas, one of the what would you call it? Each Christmas, anyway, the sergeants invite the officers to their mess to enjoy a Christmas drink and camaraderie, because you work with these men all the time. And here at the mess, of course, you were respectful, but you could, it wasn't as stiff and formal as you were like during the work day, sort of thing. And one of the officers that come there to the mess at this time was the colonel of the unit then. And he came over and approached me and he said, "Edwards, did you get the news?" And I said, "Well, yes, I did, sir." I said, "I just got the news." And I said, "What can you do about it?" I said, "I don't want to get out of the Army." "Well," it says, "if you find out what you can do," he said, "let me know," because he said, "I got my notice also." Because he had an old back injury, and of course he was Second World War veteran and so on and so forth. How he had his injury, I have no idea. But he was saying that even, as a colonel, there was nothing he could do about it. It comes straight from Ottawa. So there was, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 of us at that time were all being released from the military because we were of this year low Pullums category sort of thing. While I was at Camp Borden, they had a number of clubs there that you could join, sort of thing, in the evening. Some guys went to pistol shooting and so on and so forth. I went into scuba diving. A Navy commander had started a diving school while he was stationed there, and the training was very strict and quite difficult, as a matter of fact. As you can well imagine, a Navy commander who was a certified diver, Navy diver sort of thing. So anyway, I joined that particular club, and oh heavens, I guess I was in it approximately 2 years. In that time, we recovered one dead body from a lake from some fellows fishing at that time. And we were asked to, this was helping civilians. This was aid to the civil power, as they called it. When they called on us, the Ontario Provincial Police had divers. They had recovered one body, but they couldn't find this here one last body, and that's when we were called in. And lo and behold, it was Harry Edwards that come across the body at that time. Anyway,
about what year are you talking now here? About
where, let me see here, 60, I was put out the Christmas 64, 65. Correction, 65, 66, the Christmas of 65. And so I recovered this body spring 65 up in northern Ontario. We were flown in by bush plane. I think there was 10 of us divers that went in. And we were only in the water a short period of time, and with our superior training, it was no time. We had recovered the body, headed to shore, and the bush plane came in, and we loaded this here body aboard the bush plane, a Norseman from the forestry department, and we were flown out and went back to our garrison duties. But anyway, and then when I was told that I had to leave the service, I was a married man with a family, and as I said in the beginning there, I hadn't completed high school. I didn't have a trade per se, other than being a seaman, but I was really concerned about what I was going to do for employment. But because of my diver's training, I ended up going down to Ottawa and speaking to a diving company down there, and speaking to the man that owned the company, and he hired me on the spot sort of thing. However, I had to wait several months before I was actually released, militarily released from the military, before I could do all this. But anyway, I ended up working for him on a pipeline up in Georgian Bay, and when the contract was up, there was other jobs available. However, my wife, being a woman from Western Canada, wanted to return home. As you can appreciate, her family, her brothers, sister, cousins, and everyone, and all her friends, school friends, ex-school friends, etc., all lived in Calgary. And here she was, stuck in a small town, not knowing anyone, with children, and trying to take care of kids and shopping and all that, because I was away all weekend, as construction takes you away from home a lot. So anyway, she had a belly full of that, and I told my boss that I'd be leaving his service, and I came back out to Penticton, of all places, because during one of our training exercises in the military, let me see, that would be, oh heavens, I'm losing track of time here because of my age.
Would it be post-Korean War? Or
yes, it was. I'm trying to think here. I think it was 49. I put my name in for a junior NCO school, and part of the NCO school was we had to do our some time here in our classwork here, military law and all those subjects were covered in Calgary, but we're all loaded aboard an aircraft, Dakotas, and flown up to Vernon, BC, to parachute into Vernon area and work in the mountains and so on and so forth as part of our junior NCO training. It was quite an exercise, really, because people had in Vernon and the surrounding district, it was in the newspapers there, obviously, that paratroopers were going to drop in on their community sort of thing, and if they wanted to see this exercise, they could turn out for it. So we had them there by the hundreds, which was good for the Army because it was kind of like promoting recruiting into the military, and especially into the airborne part of it. So anyway, that's what happened. We parachuted in there, and we were so glad to get out of the aircraft, because when we come over the mountains, that I don't know how the pilot kept that aircraft in the air, because it was literally, we were in the most atrocious weather that you can envision, in that we had a lot of hitting downdrafts that took you way down 300, 400, 500 feet, and then they would shoot you back up 700, 800 feet. The aircraft was on its side, port side, and then the starboard side, and you had to really hang on. And I can remember the guy standing up when we got there. They were the one lad had chronic sickness, like chronic seasickness, and that he wasn't just throwing up stomach contents. This was bile and everything. It was coming up, and he could no longer stand up. He collapsed on the deck, where we unhooked him from the static line, drug him to the back of the aircraft and left him there, and we re-hooked up again and stood in the door, and we couldn't wait to get out of that thing and get on the ground and get this exercise on the way. So it was, when we left Calgary, it was way below zero, and now here we were bailing out into Vernon in the middle of winter, and it was like Sherlock conditions. The sun was shining. It was a beautiful day, and we landed in this soft snow, and it was just gorgeous. And I said to some of my comrades later on that evening, when I retire from this man's army, I think I'm going to think about living in BC here and get away from them harsh Alberta winters. And so when I left the East, the diving job there, I said, well, I'll give Penticton a shot, which was too bad, because as most people realize, I didn't at the time, it's a tourist town. So for a couple of months in the summertime, the only jobs available are, of course, flipping hamburgers, things like that. I wanted industrial work, and there was very, very little of that. But I did manage to get a job with a chap who run a business from his home of making orchard supplies, the bins and the ladders and all the stuff that the fruit farmers require for harvesting their crop and shipping it and so on and so forth. So I managed to get on with that, which wasn't a very good job, and it was very poor pay. And I was having a difficult time with the Department of Veterans Affairs at that time, because they booted me out because they said my back was that bad that and I had other injuries too. It wasn't just the back, but we were dealing with the back at the moment here, and I went to them and I said, well, if I'm that bad, I said, don't you think you should be giving me a pension, something to help me get by on here with the family and that? And they said, oh no, you had, in the Second World War, you had a knee injury, so we'll give you a 5% pension on that. Well, 5% isn't much of a hand when you got a bunch of kids and that are growing up like a weed. And no one child needed shoes at once. They all seemed to need them at the same time. And then there were school supplies at the beginning of the year. So what with a poor wage and a poor handout from DVA, it was hard living in Penticton. So I sat down with the wife and said, I got to get out of here, and I'm going to leave you here while I go to Calgary and secure some work. And I went there, and I'll never forget the man's name. He was working for what the devil do they call him? The employment office. Okay, and I went there, and his name was Monroe, and he had served with the PPCLI in the Second World War. So when I went in and told him I was ex-sergeant of the PPCLI, and I wanted to get to a shop that preferably had welding and stuff of that nature, I was put to work that very same day that I got there. And already I hadn't even got to the shop yet. I knew what my wages were going to be, and they were much more than what I was getting in BC. So anyway, I worked there, and I got onto welding, and I was attending school at night, SAIT, welding and blueprint reading, etc., etc. And eventually, over time, I become a B pressure welder, and was then getting top dollar. But it took a lot of years and a lot of time, and it was very difficult trying to hold down a job and go to school at night, and then trying to get the quiet time to study notes for your next class when you got kids racing through the house and Dad, can you do this? Dad, can you do that? I need this, and so on and so forth. But we persevered and got through it, and now I got 5 young kids. Well, they're not young anymore. They're all married, and I'm a great-grandfather a couple of times over, and yesterday being my birthday, I seen the results of some of these young ladies that are sitting at my table now, and I'm so very proud of them. All well educated, and not like their father. That was another thing. When they were going to school, they said, Dad, could you help me with? I said, don't even ask. I said, I don't even know new math. I don't even know the old math very well, let alone new math, you know. So anyway, as you can see, it was a difficult time for Harry and his wife. So, but we got through, and today, of course, I've been retired many years from welding, construction welding sort of thing, and let me see, and I volunteer at the museum here, and have done for, well, almost from when it first opened here. So that's been over 20-some years, and when we first come here, every day was covered off on our work blotter for each day of the week. We had that many people. But so many of my comrades have passed on now that very few of those squares in the calendar are filled in anymore. So I volunteer to come in on the weekends, on Sunday, most of the time, and I've enjoyed it. I've met the most interesting people. I met the woman who parachuted in for the English into France, and she got shot herself, an SS officer who had tortured her mother, and she let on in the pub where she was working that he was a very interesting type soldier, and of course his ego was second to none, and she found out where he lived, and she worked with the underground, of course, in France, and she was responsible for using the radios at night, sending information back to MI5 and so on in London, and giving all kinds of really helpful information. So anyway, one morning, very early in the morning, the SS officer is coming out of his apartment onto the street, and she had him taped. She had, for example, checked him out thoroughly and knew what his habits were, where he went, when he came out, when he went in, and so on and so forth. So she was waiting, well, not waiting, she was walking down the street, as you can visualize. He didn't recognize her. She had herself made up. And in her hand she had a very small pistol, which she drove into his gut and pumped in several rounds into him to make sure he was good and dead. And that was one of the people who had been torturing her mother for days before the mother expired from the terrible beatings, etc., that went on in there. That was one of the people. And there was many, and just recently here in the last, oh heavens, I would say about 6 months, a young lady come in and she had her daughter with her. She appeared to be the daughter. Oh, I'm 6, maybe 7, no more than that. And we looked at the monitors that have all the pictures from the mural on the wall, and one of the pictures on that mural is a flight of our snowbirds in flight. And so when I went over to show them how to use the monitor and how to bring up the pictures, the little girl, the mother said, "Would you bring this up?" And it showed the snowbirds flying in formation. And I said, "All you do is this, that, and the other thing." And the little girl, and the mother said to the little girl, she said, "Do you want to tell this man something?" She said, "Yes." She said, "My dad flies 2 left in that formation." He was obviously Air Force, and he must have been a superb pilot, as they have to be in the snowbirds. But it's people like that. So I enjoy coming here, really. But my health is deteriorating, and I can't get here as often as I would like to. And the years are starting to play havoc with my joints and so on and so forth. And recently I've had 4 heart attacks, and I have sugar diabetes, and I've got arthritis in my spine from injuries, and my knees. Both shoulders have been replaced from parachute accidents. So I've been kind of beat up over the years, and now that I'm much older, all them their old injuries have come back to haunt me in the form of squeaky joints and aches and pains and so on and so forth. So anyway, I just am not able to come as often as I sure would like to come, sort of thing.
So, that's great. I wanted to add in, Harry, too, and you've been, I've known you for quite a few years now, too. I think it's over 10. Mm-hmm. And you've been one of the mentors to me to get me to understand the Korean War. Mm-hmm. And, I want to thank you for that. I'm sure many people do. So, Harry, one of the questions we have is, what were you doing at the time that they were giving a call for soldiers to go to Korea? What were you doing then, and what was your response at the time?
Well, I was with the battalion when they formed the special force, and we were the regular fellows in the unit felt, that we are so well trained, we should be the ones going to Korea first. But they formed the special force for chaps to come into the military to fight in Korea, and then return home, and after 18 months leave the military if they so desired. That we were a little upset about, well, we were more than a little upset about that. We figured we should be the ones that go and they stay here. But anyway, we had the mobile strike force because we're airborne and glider trained, and they needed us here because we had been working up in the Arctic and with the Americans and so on as part of our training. So they needed these fellows to go to Korea while we kept watch on things back here. So that was the reason things worked out the way they did. Now then, at this time, this is when I went through the junior NCO school and become a lance corporal at the end of the course, and I was given a bunch of men, along with other people, of course, to train up and get them ready as replacements for the chaps who are going to Korea, that is the special force people. Because we knew there was going to be deaths and casualties and so on and so forth, and these people had to be replaced. So this is what my job was. And at that time, I also was promoted to full corporal. And once we got through their group, I believe it was around 40 men, we ended up, I think at the end of it, of about 35 or 32 men, that we turned over to battalion to train them up more or less into advanced training and get them trained in the field under field conditions, whereas all our work was right here in the garrison, teaching drill and map using, military law, and subjects such as this. Anyway, at the end of that training period for them, I was called in the office and told I was going to Camp Petawawa to run or assist in running a refresher course for the chairborne type soldiers in Ottawa. And some of these guys hadn't been on a parade square or fired a weapon, anything, for years. And Ottawa felt it was time they got off their duff and went to for a 2-week course with people right out of the unit. So there was RCR, Vandu, PPCLI, and we had a young officer from England, who an exchange officer, who oversaw the whole operation sort of thing. And our sergeant major, of course, was an old Second World War fellow from Ottawa himself. But anyway, every about 9 or 10 days, we got in a new group from Ottawa, and we started all over from scratch again on the parade square. And then, of course, our English officer taught military law, and the sergeant major taught map, and so on and so forth. And we had weapons stripping, and firing ranges, and of course there was no end to the drills that we taught them. Some of them haven't done drills in years, so it was like dealing with recruits, really. But here we were. There were sergeant majors and staff sergeants and so on, and from all branches of the service, from the intelligence corps right down to Army Service Corps clerks, etc. So we had quite a mixed bag there, but they were a joy to work with because they were all old hands, and it was kind of a relaxed course. When we were doing drill, we were strict. When we were doing weapons, we were very strict. When we were on the firing range, we were super strict, etc. But casual times, on break periods and that, we were quite a relaxed group sort of thing. So it was a real enjoyable time. It was in the middle of the summer, so it was really lovely down in the Petawawa area. Well, whilst in, I think I was on my third group of chaps that I was working with when I got called into the office and told that I had to return to my unit, that I was being shipped off to Korea, which delighted me. So anyway, but not my wife. You see, I got married in April, and would you believe they sent me to Petawawa in June, you know? The old Army, it makes you wonder what they think about in Ottawa, doesn't it? Anyway, and now they're going to send me overseas for a year. So I got home in time to get my underwear washed and that, and I got to see my wife for a couple of days. And in the meantime, I was being kitted out, inoculated, and all the other terrible things that happen to you before you ship out. You know, getting dog tags and bringing all your medical pullums, you know, you had to go through your medics, that is, and get all checked out, the usual thing there, and re-kitted and so on and so forth. So anyway, there I was off to Korea because Jack Curry, who was a section commander for 2 Platoon A Company in Korea, 1 battalion, he got through the Second World War without a scratch in the Navy, and here he was, I believe it was their first under fire attack. Jack was killed as a section commander sort of thing, along with several of his men. So, excuse me, that's what my job was to be, to go and replace Jack Curry. So anyway, I ended up, now then, you see, I wasn't with a platoon or a company or anything like that, so I was supernumerary. That is, I was buckshee, I was an extra guy sort of thing, and so they put me in with the pioneer section, the explosive experts and so on. And that's who I shipped out with and went overseas with on the John Hugh Gaffey, which was American troop ship at that time. And we boarded her at Seattle, Washington, and at that time there was thousands upon thousands of American troops, many of them black troops, both men and women. The upper cabins were all women. I believe a lot of them were stenographers, nurses, and people in the medical side of things. And then below decks, you had everybody. The PPCLI, would you know, were right down at the very bottom of the vessel. And it was pretty cramped quarters on that ship, I can tell you. And we, Brigadier Cahoon was there. He's an old First World War Patricia, and of course a PFer. And he, of course, was retired at this time, but he was there to see each and every one of us off and wish us well on our venture, sort of thing. And we got to sea, and we were out to sea, I'd say about a week, I guess, and off Hawaii we ran into a typhoon. I will never forget it. Now, I couldn't care less if it was a hurricane, because I had sailed as a teenager, and I'd been on some horrible storms on Lake Superior and so on. Some of the storms were that bad where the ship was actually damaged from the battering we took. So this year typhoon business, well, the typhoon was the first time I'd ever been in something like that. But anyway, I can remember coming up on deck. You weren't allowed on deck, but I opened the passageway door and looked out, and I could not see the top of the waves. They were that high above the deck, sort of thing. So you can see why you weren't allowed on deck, because when the water came over the decks there, it took away anything that was loose. So anyway, this went on, and some of the troops down below, you would not believe this, but I'll give you some idea what it was like. The washrooms along the wall, sort of thing, were like chrome basins, something you'd see in a motorhome. They weren't very large basins, but they were basins, and of course you were expected to keep yourself clean and shaved, etc. in these here basins, which we did. We did a pretty good job, really. But after a while, when we got into the typhoon, you could not use the basin. They were filled to the brims with puke. The Americans just come in and they had puke on their beds, they had it on the floor, decks, they had it, the toilets, you couldn't use a toilet. It was filled to the top, and you couldn't flush the toilets because they empty into the sea, and if you open the valves to let that out, the sea would come in and, well, as you can well imagine. Anyway, now then, going up to the stairwell, and you'd go up about 8 steps, and then there was a landing, and then a 90-degree turn, and the steps leading up to the next landing, and a landing, and then the step. Well, around the edge of the landing there, they have what they call a fish plate, and what all it is a flange. It's like a 4-inch or 6-inch flange that goes around the edge of this here landing between steps like. Would you believe, when the ship rolled to port and starboard, you had a big wave of puke going over the edge of the fish plate. It was that bad, and the stench down there you could not believe. Americans puked in their helmets, they puked in their bunks, beds. You would not believe it. I do not, and I'm not being, because of Patricia, I'm not favoring the PPCLI or not. I don't know of one man in the PPCLI that threw up anything. Maybe that was because at the point we were in the center of the vessel and in the very bottom of the vessel. Whereas if you're up higher, of course, when you roll port and starboard, now you really notice that the ship is rolling, sort of thing. But if you're on the bottom, you're kind of, it moves, but not as much as up higher. So anyway, I don't know if that's got anything to do with it, but I know. But after about 3 or 4 days, the seas started to let down. We passed through the typhoon, and in small group, you were allowed to go on deck if you so desired. Well, I wanted to get on deck in the worst way because the storm didn't bother me a bit. And there was a little black American fellow, I'll never forget him. His boots were untied, and he had high-top boots with laces dragging. He had a ball cap type hat like they wear, and it was turned sideways so the peak was over his ear. His shirt was undone, and he was walking from the after end of the ship up towards me. And like I say, the sea didn't bother me, so I ate all my lunch. But anyway, one of the things we got for lunch was a greening apple. Not the greatest thing for eating, but anyway, I couldn't have cared less. It was an apple, and it was green. And I went on deck, and I just took a bite from this apple. And this here black guy looked up, and he had been saying, "Oh, man, I was sick." Oh, and he was from the deep south, so you can imagine the accent there. And he was having a conversation with himself about how sick he was. And at that time, he looked up and see me with the apple, and he brought his head back, and the next thing I seen was a column of puke coming at me. And it was with deadly accuracy he hit the apple and my hand. Now, I was most upset, because I was looking at my apple, my hand, and there was great gobs of whatever he had ate or didn't eat 4 days dripping off my fingers. Now, where are you going to go to get rid of this stuff, you see? You can't wipe it on your sleeve. There's lots of water around, but you can't use it in the form of waves, etc. So anyway, when we finally got to Yokohama Harbor, I believe there was 4 men missing. They're missing at sea. We don't know if they were washed overboard or not. But I know one little fellow he should have been over the side just for puking on my apple. But anyway, I was...
Harry, could I interrupt you? And I don't know if you have a great anecdote about the weapons competition. You guys wanted to run a
Yeah, well, we're going to get to that right away.
Okay.
So after this storm, of course, the Navy personnel on the ship did an excellent, superb job. They were to be complimented. They went down in there, and everything was hosed down. The toilets were flushed and cleaned. The bowls were cleaned. The puke was removed, and everything was just super. You would never know that this utter chaos had been down there. It took them about 2 days, 2.5 days to get this back to ship shape again. And it was sure nice to find a toilet that you could use and so on, as you can well imagine, and to splash a bit of water into the armpits, etc., because you're now down in the warmer part of the ocean. But anyway, the typhoon's over, the excitement of that's all over again, and people are now starting to walk around out on decks and sunning themselves and so on. And of course, after a few days of this, you get a little bored. Well, so down below decks, several of us thought, well, let's get something going here with the Americans. And they had, of course, the Garand rifle and the .30 caliber carbine. And we had the bolt action type of rifle. Anyway, prior to us and the battalion leaving for Korea, when we were told that we would be going to Korea to relieve the 2nd Battalion, We had NCOs sent to Fort Benning, Georgia, to learn American weapons. So their 30 calibers, their 50s, the Grand Rifle, and the carbine, and the 45 pistol. And they had about a 6-week course there, and then they come back to the battalion, and of course, we had courses there on how to strip and assemble these weapons both by night and by day, by feel. You were blindfolded and had a bunch of bits and pieces laying around, and you had to just by feel, because they were trying to assimilate night or rainy conditions where visibility was very poor, and you had to keep these weapons working, and this was their way of assuring that we could do this. So we were pretty proficient with it. As a matter of fact, it just got to be kind of a game to see how fast we could dismantle and put these things back together. Now, we just didn't mess around with the big major parts like the breech block and some of them, or magazines. We got right down into the trigger mechanism with little itty-bitty springs and sears and all the rest of it that goes into making up a trigger group. Well, we said to the Americans, we're a little bored here, fellas. Could we borrow one of your Grand Rifles and one of your or your carbines? And they said, well, what do you want to do with them? And we said, we want to have a little exercise. We were trained in Canada how to use these and how to strip them. And we got some hot shots here that figure that they're really good at it, and they want to have a race. And the private said, hey man, you're not going to use my rifle. And the guy with the Grand said, nor mine. And we said, why not? Well, he said, because what if you can't get it back together? He said, we don't know that much about them. So this gives you an idea how well trained these fellows were going to a combat zone. Anyway, they went and asked the sergeant, and he said, oh, geez, let me see that. Well, anyway, he and the top cat come around where we were in the quarters here, and he said, what's this here story I hear you fellas want to do stripping and assembling of 2 of our weapons? Is that correct? And we said, yes. He said, have you done this before? And we said, many times. I said, and I didn't say, but one of the ringleaders here that wanted to do this little exercise said, yeah, he said, I think I'm the best, and he thinks he's the best at tearing her down and putting her back together again. And he said, but we only have the 303 rifle, and we would like to do it with yours, with your permission, of course. Top Kick said, okay. He said, I'm game. He said, I want to see this. He said, I've never seen this done before. So we got a Grand and a carbine, these 2 birds. And there, you can imagine now, there was about 30 or 40 of us, because everybody was going by, was talking about this, and it spread through the ship like crazy. So everybody, you'd think you were at a ball game. Anyway, our guys took a blanket off one of their beds and spread it out, and one guy stripped the Grand down and just threw all the parts, trigger group, and these guys had never seen. Even the Top Kick wasn't sure about the trigger mechanisms. And I thought, my God. Anyway, and we did the same thing with the carbine, the 30 carbine. Now all these spare parts out of this weapon, all you got now is the stock and the barrel. And all the other guts and bits and pieces that could possibly come off, came off. Put in the center of the blanket. Now they gathered up the 4 corners of the blanket and shook all the guts out of the blanket, mixing up the parts. Well, I thought the Top Kick was going to pass out. The sergeant, he had to leave all of a sudden to go to the washroom. He had never seen anything like this, even in Fort Benning. But anyway, that's how we were trained, right down to privates, before we got there. And when we got to Korea, we didn't have these weapons a lot of the time. Some of the guys had 50s, some managed to sell whiskey, exchange whiskey, And we'd get a brand new 50 caliber because they couldn't get booze and we could. So anyway, that's another story. We shook this blanket up and down like you wouldn't believe. And then they spread the blanket out and the two guys stood back. Now, you'd think this was just like a cockfight, and sleeves rolled up, and somebody said, "Go!" So these two birds, one grabbed the Grand, one grabbed the carbine, and they were reaching in the pile, rooting around in the pile there for springs and bits and receivers and everything else that you could think of. And each piece went in just as smooth as silk, just bang, bang, bang. And then within a couple of minutes, they fired the action to show that the weapon was all back together and in firing order, sort of thing. The American top kick said that he had never, in all his years, seen a demonstration like this. He could not believe, and foreign troops at that. And their troops, they just been on the firing range. If anything happened, you called the sergeant down to help you out with your whatever the stoppage was. Well, we can't allow that sort of thing in our fellas. When we have stoppage, you're expected to clear your own stoppage, sort of thing. But anyway, that was one of the things we did on the ship there, just to entertain ourselves at one time there, sort of thing. So anyway, we get to Yokohama, and of course they tied us up in the dock, and we had to wait overnight. We got there like around noon one day, and it was the next day before we could get off the ship. And then we were marched over onto a train that took us to the other end of Japan, where we got onto a ship that brought us across the Sea of Japan to Korea. And you knew you were getting close to Korea because the human waste had been collected for centuries to fertilize their fields. And that odor, of course, moved with the breeze right out to sea. So anyway, when we were a few miles offshore from Busan, you got the odor of Korea. We said, "Oh boy, what are we in for?" But anyway, and we finally got docked, and that was the first time on that ship when we went over there. There was no bunks or beds. You were given a rice mat you spread on the deck, and you used your small pack for a pillow and your great coat for a cover, and you curled up in your rice mat, and that's where you slept on that thing. So anyway, we got off that vessel, and the Americans were there. We were in single file, marched through like a kitchen area sort of thing, but it wasn't. You didn't sit down to tables. There was like a plank hanging off the wall, and you just kind of got your a plate. They called it shit on a shingle because it was a terrible mess of like hamburger meat and this terrible brown sludge like grease. Oh God, it even brings back memories, makes me gag. But anyway, and that's what you got, and an apple or an orange or something like that sort of thing. And then you stood at this here plank sort of thing, and you waited for a spot for to become clear where you kind of taxied up and put your dish down and ate. And from there you were formed up outside in your various companies and platoons and so on, and marched aboard this train, which was run. The engineer was American engineer sort of thing. And it was a narrow gauge railway. Some of the windows were missing from the coach, so that was lovely. When they were roaring through the night, and it's in the fall sort of thing, getting near the fall. So it was pretty cold and damp sort of thing. But the thing that was outstanding in that station in Busan, I'll never forget it, little children they were just covered in filth, were in rags. They had no shoes on their feet.